Eh bien, quel accueil, Claudie, vous êtes accueillie comme les grands chefs d'orchestre.
Claudie, just like a director.
Eh bien, pour ceux qui étaient là à la dernière rencontre,
for those of you who were there for the last session, we are leaving the shores of historical novels and the war to come closer to a place that is protected from history and the war, a place that is similar to where we are today, in the mountains, in the forest, close to savagery and to human beings and what they become. It's a great pleasure for us to welcome Claudie Hunzinger, novelist, winner of the 2022 Femina Prize, author of a dozen novels, a work of magnificent language, some lyricism. You've published many books, including L'Incandescente in 2016, a beautiful book about your mother. Les Grands Cerfs followed that, a deeply moving book about an encounter, supernatural encounter between a narrator, a woman who lives in the mountains, like you in the Vosges, and who bumps into a herd of deer. With the possibility for the narrator to track this herd of deer, which is the subject of Les Grands Cerfs, which was awarded the Décembre Prize in 2019. I was part of that jury, and I can testify to the fact that your book was the only one that was chosen unanimously by the jury, which goes to show that it moved us very deeply. We felt the savagery and the untamed, which is one of your topics. Reading your books, it's hard not to think of Henry David Thoreau's masterpiece Walden. Un chien à ma table, the book that we will be talking about today, is part of that same movement. We are again with a narrator who is an author called Sophie. She lives with her companion Grieg, and they've decided to exit the world for a number of years. He probably more than she, because he sleeps during the day and reads at night. So he is out of time in a sense. We discover a place that is yours, an abandoned house in a hamlet in the Vosges mountains, just like in Les Grands Cerfs. There is the disruption of the animal realm, not a deer this time, but a dog who comes and disrupts this old couple's life. They start wondering about their life, about their love. They're an old couple, not because they're old and aging, but because their love has lasted for a phenomenally long amount of time. So it's also a story of love. And what it means to age for the Waldens, of which you are part, who have chosen the mountains rather than the city. What it means to age for a woman, an author who sometimes feels that her strength is diminishing. Before asking you a few questions, I'd like to ask you to read out an excerpt from your book. As I said, this couple lives with a certain number of animals, including a donkey, Litanie, and the interpreters will let you enjoy the original text.
Dormi d'être aussi serré et mal dormi de joie, mais je me suis réveillée d'impatience bien avant mon heure habituelle, avant le jour, comme on s'éveille tôt le premier matin dans un nouveau pays. J'ai tâté à gauche, j'ai tâté à droite. Tout était réel. J'ai pensé, on va aller voir notre ânesse, Litanie. On prendra le chemin qui fait le tour de la prairie. J'espère que la présentation se fera dans le calme. Mais j'étais sûre que la petite chienne, arrivée par le haut des moraines, avait déjà repéré la présence de Litanie, dont les effluves devaient infuser toute la montagne de leur compassion. Yes, on avait éventé la bienveillance. Et c'est pourquoi elle avait bifurqué vers notre maison. Le parfum d'un âne est magnanime. Non, ce n'est pas ça. Plein de mansuétude. Non, pas encore ça. De responsabilité? Oui, mais cherche encore. de pressentiment? Oui. Mais il manque quelque chose. D'irrémédiable? Oui. C'est un parfum qui a longuement réfléchi, qui s'approche doucement de vous comme d'un désastre, qui vous chuchote « Laisse-toi emporter, disperse-toi dans les herbes, lâche tout. Il est trop tard, ma chérie, trop tard pour tout, pour tant de choses. N'y pense plus. Respire la douceur de celle qui reste. »
Alors, puisque le thème de Bibliotopia est cette année...
Since this year's topic for Bibliotopia is uncertainty, I was wondering whether it's this notion of uncertainty that the book was born, uncertainty at the idea that you could continue to live and to write. Yes, I think that's it. I've just went through the Colette exhibition, and I read something that she said. She was asked, "What's your next book?" And she answered, "I never have a next book. I always think this is my last." And this is the kind of thing that I feel. I constantly think, will I be in a state of grace? Will I really want to start all over again, to talk about the life that I lead? And the book starts with a lamento. She hasn't yet met that little dog. Yes. And she says she thinks it's way too late for a certain number of things. I will no longer be able to swim across the lake like I did last year. I will no longer be able to run through the woods. If I want to write a book about nature, I have to be able to walk through the underbrush, through the thorny bushes. I have to be able to crawl, and yet I can no longer do so. So that's what it starts with. She's no longer certain that she will be able to do so. So that's the uncertainty. In this book, you talk about the choice that was decisive in your life, the choice to live in the mountains for 50 years. Yes, I think it all started with that. My companion and myself decided in 1965, it was, to move to the mountains. We used to be city dwellers, and we decided to settle down in the mountains. In order to do so, we needed to have a farming diploma. My companion learned how to be a shepherd. We therefore settled down with a herd. In actual fact, if we decided to live in the mountains with a herd, it was for literary reasons. Francis, my husband, had read Jeancourt. We had indeed read Thoreau, but also Jack London. These kinds of books. So it was for literary reasons. Because of our love for literature, we had to face the reality of living in the mountains at an altitude of 1,500 meters. We had a herd that we needed to feed. We had to grow hay. And all of a sudden, without having necessarily planned for this, we ended up being prisoners in our neck of the woods, in our neck of the mountains. We lived with our herd. We lived in a closed space that we couldn't leave. And then, after a while, we had to breed our lambs. We had to sell them. We realized that it was impossible for us to do so. And after the years, was 1970, 1965, 1970. We changed the goats that we bred. We chose goats for their wool. We went to the Pyrenees, to the UK. We found other kind of sheep with very sophisticated wool. And so all of a sudden we had all this substance, all this wool that we had to work with. And what had been imposed to us at first, as I said, we were imprisoned in our own island, became a concept for our life. We realized that staying put, staying right there with our herd, with our wool, we had baggage. Our parents were primary school teachers. We were able to name plants. We were able to grow plants. We knew the names of trees. We knew what plants were good for. With a lot of curiosity, just like an explorer in a jungle on the other side of the planet, we started exploring what was around us. And that's how we were able to start dyeing the wool that we had with plant-based dyes. We were able to build objects. I had very little technical know-how or background, but we liked what was rough, what was natural, what was direct, and that's how we made a living. We explored the world around us, and it continued constantly. We continued exploring all the aspects of the place that we were inhabiting. And even today, we haven't finished yet, because it's hard to exhaust the nature around you. In this context, you became an artist, didn't you? Yes, because there's literature, but there's also other types of arts. Yes, exactly. I'd say that my work, the way I earned a living, was through what I could invent with my hands. I know Lausanne very well because through the course of our lives there were different magical people. We were lost up there in our mountain, far from everything, far from big cities. But as I said, some magical people came our way, invited us to exhibition. It's the case of François Maté, of Rosemarie Leponeur, of Lausanne, who in 1982 came to Bambois. She wanted to organize an exhibition on paper, a new way of expressing ourselves, artistically speaking, in a gallery in Lausanne. So she came to see us, and she funded a year of research on plant-based paper that we exhibited here in the end. So yes, our lifestyle led us to explore more than plasticians. We were explorers. And then came literature when I had a little more time on my hands. In this particular book, we see how this life is a literary element. At one point, you realize that your lifestyle was literature in and of itself. Yes, absolutely. You're entirely right. This is sort of the way things happened. We're in a direct and rough relationship with the world around us. We explored the grounds around us. But coming back in time, there was an exhibition in the Vosges canton on the Jura, the highlands, the Alps. We tried to find different colors, different dyes, different pigments in Lausanne. But I guess the literature happened the same way. I don't separate things. Whether we explore things on the basis of their substance materialistically, like Lucretia. I did that with language and words. I haven't studied literature. And this enabled me to look at literature the way I would look at an unexplored jungle, empirically, directly. And what I work with my hands, with my wrists, and what I explore through literature, through my words, what I experience, what I live. Life is always in the forefront, always, even in my texts. And I guess that's what you wanted to ask me about. Yes, exactly. Now, the other uncertainty in the world, in the book, is that of the world, the sustainability of the world. Yes, the world which you chose to belong to. There's an apocalyptic feeling in the book. There's this beautiful pages where you mention the summer solstice, and even during the summer solstice, when there's lots of light, you say the shade is going to win. Yes, and in actual fact, I find this admirable. June 21st is the beginning of the summer. Days and night last as long. And on the next day, on June 22nd, things decline. If you look at Chinese philosophy, in the midst of the most beautiful things, things are in constant flux. They change constantly. Nothing is stable. Everything is in motion. So in the midst of the summer, there's already something growing. And I think that's exactly what happened. In the midst of the summer, days start declining. But then comes the winter solstice. You're in the middle of the winter. And around December 21st, a little bit afterwards, January 1st, January 2nd, it's freezing outside, and yet days start growing longer. So something happens there. Now, to answer your question about uncertainty as to the sustainability of the world, this is a book that I've had inside me for a long time. I think about the nature of things. Lucrèce talks about this. He says that the walls of the world will crumble one day, speaks about the plague, Muendia Mundi, the walls of the world will crumble down. So that's something that we know. We know that there's uncertainty and change. But there's also the increasing extinction, the extinction of insects that you note that worries you very deeply. Yes. And that's something that is constantly on my mind at this stage. The title of our meeting is on nature transforming lives, and I've got so many examples right in front of my eyes, lived experiences of the power of nature, which is so fragile, so weak, which is constantly being challenged at this stage. Nature is powerful, but it's also fragile, and it requires us to participate. And this makes me think of birds, le tarier des prés. It's a tiny bird the size of a robin, and it's one of the main migrators. The winchat crosses deserts and oceans to come back to a single field close to my house to build its nests, eat insects, eat butterflies before the winchat leaves again. That's the power of nature. A tiny little bird crossing deserts, crossing seas. And if the farmer did not have a relationship with this bird, then the power of nature would be broken. Because where I live in the Vosges mountains, we mow earlier and earlier. It starts in May, but if you mow as early as the month of May, you mow a first time, then a second time, then a third time. There are no flowers. Then there's manure or slurry that is spread over fields and kills everything. Insects, butterfly eggs. The valley where I live is a valley that is at the forefront of farming technology, and there are no longer any butterflies, there are no longer any birds. It has nothing to do with global warming. It's just farming practices that explain this. And it's the world asking for increasing profits, and that's something that you can't escape. So there's this field, this beautiful field that I went to in July, where there were lots of seeds, lots of flowers, and that's where I saw this beautiful winchat. And the person that I went there with told me, I'll mow, but I'll mow all around, because if I mow everything, they'll disappear. There are only 3 couples of winchats left. So I think there's got to be a relationship between humans and nature, otherwise we'll just destroy nature entirely. This was an idea that was already present in Les Grands Cerfs, and when you define your role as a writer, you say that you have to be a sentry of the other world. Do you also want to tell stories like the ones that you tell? Is that your role as a sentry? Well, I think it goes hand in hand. Being personally devastated by the devastation that is happening at high speed. It's there, it's immediate. No time elapses, it's direct. We're personally devastated by the devastation, and we're still stunned by the beauty that's left over. If you're not sensitive to the beauty of the world, you'll never protect the world.
Alors, bois banni.
Bois banni is not really called bois banni in real life. It's Bambois that became bois banni in your book. Why do you emphasize the word banni, which means banishment? Well, there are 2 ways you can read it. Bambois is the name, it's the original name. It should be spelled B-A-N and not B-A-M, then bois. It means the woods that belong to all, the common woods. And as I read a philosophy book, I don't know why he was talking about Bambois. He said it could also be called bois banni. You can look at it 2 ways. Being banished from society, being exiled, or banished from the horrors of society. So in the second meaning, you escape society. So either you're banished or you escape. It's a quite fantastical place, the way it's presented to the reader. We don't know where the prairie came from, the Amish, Protestants fleeing persecution, heretics. Well, in Alsace, there are several valleys, quite remote valleys, that in the 18th century and sometimes in the 19th century as well, Amish communities. And others who came from Switzerland. Hunzinger, my family name, rather my husband's family name, the Hunzingers came from Switzerland. It's a Swiss name. And they were refugees in this valley. And originally they were Amish people. So in these valleys, it's possible to live apart from the rest of the population and to live the way one wishes. So I wanted to depict these people as people who didn't want to become corrupted and then finally, in the end, went to the United States. How would you define or describe the place you've been living in for 50 years? It's resistant to all idealisms, all systems, all mystiques, all power, and all forms of universalism, even ecology. How do you live in this place? What is left? What is left if you belong to no group? You asked me this question, and I don't know what I told you. What is left? You showed me what is left. By negation, yes. What's left is the monad, the daimon, what we are in ourselves, what is unique about us. No two of us are the same. There's something important in that idea for me. There's something powerful, strong, and unique in each one of us. So we have this, even if we don't belong to a group, not even an ecological group. I never wanted to be part of a group. That's probably why I was a terrible child. I was the one who got the most spankings in the family. Maybe it was a way of escaping from my family or the family as an institution. It was a way of showing that I was different. And sometimes it was a door that was open onto poetry for me because I was different. Where's the meaning when there's no more meaning? If there's no meaning in society from religion, in the world, what if you reject everything? Where is the meaning? So yes, I know what I said. I said, we can do what children do. You spread your legs, you bend over, and you look at the world upwards from between your legs. Upside down. What does the world become? It's just a group of 4 shapes, volumes, colors, dancing, very fresh, very new, and very beautiful. Another thing that's left, you say this in the book, and that is the dialogue that you have with creatures that are not humans. There's, yes, the dog, litany, the donkey, but there are also wasps, deer. This reminds me of Saint Francis of Assisi when you talk about your second childhood. Is this what your life has been made of? This dialogue with other creatures? Yes, absolutely. There's the dialogue with other creatures. It's marvelous. Dialogue with most of the creatures around us. Can we say my brother the wolf, my sister the rain? Do we have to say my sister the tick, my brother the virus? Yes, I think we do. I think nature is not just wonderful, it's also terrifying. It's an abyss. And sometimes I wonder, what would I prefer? If I were in the forest, would I prefer to have a bear rip me limb from limb, or a human being who wanted to hurt me? I'd prefer the bear, because I would die without hatred. That's the way I see it. But I would really hate it if a human being killed me, because I'm sorry to have to say this, but I think that we are a pathologically violent species. And in nature, violence is never pathological. In the book, you seem to have to fight misanthropy to a certain extent, and you write, I am in favor of humans in the world. Humans are the major characters of the novel of the earth. So in this book, which is an ode to nature, you did have to profess faith in humankind. Yes, of course. Of course I did. In the book, the character that really believes in mankind and helps the narrator realize that she needs to write a book. When she's doubting that she can write the next book, the little dog, Yes, drags her outside when she has no faith in herself, accompanies her, takes her off on a walk, but not too far away. The dog doesn't like Sophie to wander off, to go too far from the house, so she nips at her ankles the way a sheepdog nips at the heels of the sheep. She says, don't go too far from human language, don't go towards the other languages, and it's the dog who does this until the narrator realizes that she's going to write the book. And then the dog disappears as if she had accomplished her mission. The dog was the one that had the greatest faith in humankind. Dogs still believe in humankind. So you have written some very beautiful pages on the dog and the friendship that the narrator has with Yes. And she and Yes have conversations.
Ensemble, les chiens et les humains. Voilà, tout en restant différents. J'insiste beaucoup. Ce ne sont pas des enfants, ce ne sont pas nos enfants. Ce sont des êtres à part avec leur monde et qui ont évolué en nous laissant à nous la part du langage et eux s'occupant plutôt de lui et de l'odorat et de la course. Voilà, nous évoluons ensemble. Voilà. Donc,
we evolve together. I'm going to read the part where she and Yes have a conversation.
Et dans sa chambre lisait. Yes et moi, on se parlait. En aucun cas, je ne cherchais à lui voler son animalité. C'était elle qui lorgnait du côté de mon humanité. On avait de longues conversations. Elle adorait que je lui parle comme je parlais à Grieg, avec cette mélopée qui sortait de mon gosier, avec ma langue, l'humaine. Elle avait vite repéré les mélodies de notre langage, à Grieg et moi, mélodies qui l'excluaient. Alors quand je lui parlais comme à Grieg, avec des inflexions, des hésitations, des reprises, quand je lui disais des choses qui étaient de notre musique, Elle en avalait sa salive d'émotion. Elle en avait les yeux embués. Elle aurait été, de toutes nos chiennes, celle qui vénérait le plus ce que je représentais. Malgré son épisode aux mains d'un zoophile, c'était une petite chienne profondément humaniste, dans la mesure où elle adorait ce qui, prétendument, nous distingue, notre parler. Très sensible au logos. Elle avait l'air, à notre contact, d'avoir découvert son existence et d'adorer son pouvoir.
Et puis, il faut quand même quitter un peu les animaux pour revenir
So
vers Grieg.
let's move away from animals and talk a bit about Grieg,
Très beau personnage du livre.
another very
Il dit à un moment n'avoir jamais été
interesting
à sa place.
character. He feels, as he says, that he's never found his place in the world.
C'est seulement ainsi qu'il
But he doesn't say it in a tragic way. It's as if he's chosen this.
souverain, délabré, insolent, vous
He's
écrivez.
insolent,
Est-ce que c'est
dilapidated,
cela que
as
vous
you
admirez
say.
le plus?
Is this what you admire the most
Jusqu'au bout,
about Grieg?
insolent, de toute façon.
Being
Oui, je
insolent?
pense que c'est vraiment dès le départ.
Yes, from the very start.
Nous nous sommes rencontrés au jardin d'enfants.
We met in kindergarten,
De vue, on s'est retrouvés.
and then we lost sight of each other, and we met
Et à
again
ce
later.
moment-là, vers 17 ans, 18 ans,
We were 17 or
je
18,
vais lui laisser son nom Grieg, qui lui va bien, Grigou.
so I thought I'll
Je pense
call him Grigou for now.
qu'il avait déjà en lui tous les poètes.
He was all poets. This was in 1955, 1960. You could buy books published by Segers. He had books of poetry. He had all of them. He was also someone who could not be broken. He was unbreakable. He withstood the mercantile world, society, social conventions. The character of Grieg is the character who taught me how to say no. I called our dog Yes, the opposite of me. But at the same time, it has always been important for me to have somebody who has been affectionately mocking. It's much better than somebody who seems to take you seriously, but behind the scenes criticizes you, creating competition and opposition. So that's Grieg. You told me that you called him Grieg after the composer. Yes? Yes, Grieg, the composer. And from what I know about Edward Grieg, it's that he added a passage to a duet by Mozart, I think it was a sonata. I heard it played by Marta Argerich and by Piotr Szewski. And then I listened to Richter's rendition without the extension by Grieg. And I think I prefer it with the extra passage by Grieg. It's extremely joyful.
Alors, il y a quelque chose qui lie évidemment le couple, c'est la littérature.
The couple are bound together by literature. He reads, she writes. There's some lovely pages where you talk about Tolstoy. There's a photo of Tolstoy on the desk, on your desk. Yes, Tolstoy, that's an interesting story. A friend of mine who has Russian ancestors went to see Tolstoy's grave, and she said, Tolstoy's grave is just 1 centimeter of earth on a meadow, in a meadow, that's it. And she has a picture of Tolstoy's tunic. which is a mixture of cotton and linen, or hemp. So it's a mujik's tunic. And I also talk about Tolstoy in the book because the story is really peculiar. In my previous book, Les Grands Cerfs, the narrator, who's also me in a certain way, discovers as she walks through the forest in the snow a cavity where a deer has lain. She noticed it because the snow had melted. When I discovered this, because it was me, I knew that a deer had been there. I sat in it. I sat as the deer would have done, and I imagined that I was the deer. I could feel the antlers growing, and I thought this was something that only I had thought of. And not long afterwards, Grieg sent me the book on the Cossacks, Les Cossacks, the book by Tolstoy, and it talks about how Tolstoy, as a young man, went to Ukraine, went hunting, missed a deer, came back the next day and found the bush that the deer had been hiding in, crawled under it, found the cavity, sat in the cavity, imagined that he was the deer, and then that he was the cosmos. Sometimes, as a writer or writeress, I thought that this was a unique experience, that I was the only woman who was so close and able to identify with these animals, more than men in any case. No, well, there you have it. It wasn't true.
Vous avez un rapport très intime aux écrivains.
You have a very intimate relationship with writing and writers. These writers, you talk about them as if they were walking across the field in front of your house. Tolstoy with his gray smock, Kafka, Philip Roth, Rilke, appear and exit your book as if they were close friends. Yes, I think that comes from solitude. When you live in the mountains in an old farmhouse, which has a library, you don't feel alone or lonely. There's an interesting energy in the air. It crackles. It's something that feels like radioactivity. Of course we're not alone. Of course, when you have a library, the writers are there too. Yesterday, just yesterday, I reread a beautiful passage. Yes, so the authors are all there in my house. The big problem, our big worry, it's not, is it about our children? No. No, they also have a library, but what will our grandchildren, what will become of our grandchildren who don't read, who are always on their tablets? What will happen to Anna Karenina? These are questions that we ponder. Un chien à ma table is a tribute to another author who's been with you for a long time, Janet Frame, who wrote An Angel at My Table, which became a very beautiful film thanks to Jane Campion. Tell us why you paid tribute to her, even going so far as using the same kind of title.
Well, I discovered that the world is much vaster than I thought. I've got many more sisters than I had imagined. Janet Frame, in a book that was her first novel. It's also a posthumous book. She didn't want it to be published while she was alive, so it was published once she was dead. Maybe because it showed the reasons why she had been secluded because she was schizophrenic. So the book was published once she had died. And in this book, she explains why, when she left from New Zealand to go to the UK, considers herself to be a migratory bird. She feels a relation with other birds, with the clouds, and she explains why other human beings feel strange to her. This feeling of strangeness with other human beings and this identification with the rest of the world of the living makes her a sister to me. But very recently, I've also discovered that Rosa Luxemburg, who spent a lot of time in prison in the garden that she could go out in, had as only companion a swallow. She was asked, what would you like to have written on your grave? She wrote, chirp, chirp.
La fin du livre rend Sophie à sa solitude.
Towards the end of the book, Sophie is alone again. And this book that expressed so many different voices, so many different beings, closes on the image of an office, a desk, and a woman who starts writing again. Is that also the subject of the book, the irreversible solitude of the writer? Enchanted solitude. Now, turning to the audience, do you have any questions? I'm sure you have many for Claudie Hunzinger. With a microphone, please. First of all, thank you very much. Thanks for all these things that you've revealed to us. Thanks for the way you express yourself. What I would like to know is how in your world, in the world you've told us about, what is the relationship that you have with the news, with the world of politics, with everything that's part and parcel of our daily reality, including at this moment in time. You're absolutely right to be asking this question. 50 years ago, my husband and myself felt that we could be secluded from society in our shack, and we realized little by little that that's absolutely not possible. So I'm very much attuned to what's happening in the world. We're one, in a sense. I read Le Monde and Libération online. I hardly ever listen to the radio, but I do read these daily newspapers. I no longer listen to the radio because as I'm writing, it's important for me to have silence around me so I can hear the little voices in me. But news is very important indeed. And there's no way you can shelter from the news. Once you realize this, once you come to this realization, you realize the role that you have as a writer. I think the way we have to speak and write about the things that we can still save, the things that are still there, even though the walls of the world will collapse one day or another, it's going to happen. I don't know how, but it will happen. The present remains important. It is the most important. What is there and what can be saved needs to be talked about. It's the only weapon I have at my disposal. That's the only thing I can do. I can write books. That's my way of doing it. I can speak about the beauty of things that are disappearing. I'm not exactly sure I've answered your question, though. Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be listening to you this afternoon. I read your book, and as I read your book, at the beginning of Un chien à ma table, I thought of several things, including Monte Verita. And as you mention it, towards the end of the book, as a Swiss citizen, I felt a kind of sorority or fraternity, so it was very interesting to me. And I was wondering how you ended up in Monte Verita, be it in your writing or in your life. And I've got another question. In your writing, you remind me of Anna Halperin, who's a choreographer and a dancer from California, who found in nature a source of inspiration. When was that? Well, it was in the 60s. I think it even started in the 50s and continued in the 60s. First of all, I was wondering whether you knew about her work. No, but I realized that it is related to Monte Verita. I don't know how I ended up in Monte Verita. I think it's because of this utopia. You think that it's possible to live as one in nature, in harmony with nature. You think it's possible to live a secluded life in nature. Monte Verita is absolutely fascinating. It's fascinating to see what it was at first and how it was contaminated by Nazi ideas, and how the choreographer became the choreographer at the helm of the Olympic Games, then left to the UK and became the choreographer of workers in factories. What's absolutely fascinating is the complexity of things. It's always the light and the shadow, and the way they are intermingled, interwoven. So yes, Monte Verita is a topic in and of itself. How important it was early on during the century, intellectually speaking. There's no great intellectual or politician who went through Monte Verita. Thank you. I've got a slightly more technical question about the way you write and the way you think about the novels you write. To me, you are fundamentally a poet. But you do write novels, and that's not a slight feat. When you start working, do you know where you're heading? No. Thanks. It's true. I started writing poetry as a young child. I was maybe 4 or 5. We would go and pick wild raspberries during the war, so we tried picking everything we could, berries. And I remember that we would come up with poems. We would try to find variations to poems. And there's this poem by Claudel.
Avec de l'eau fraîche, un gros bouquet de roses fraîches. Et alors nous disions avec un gros bouquet de fraises rouges.
So we would find variations on this poem by Claudel. This was fundamental in my life until I was 14 or 15. I tend to write novels, but they're built on poetry. And I always mention Roberto Bonanno, who also started out writing poems. If you look at his works, they've just been published integrally. He started with poems, and then he continued with other works. And he says that to him, poetry is hidden under the novels. It's also hidden in Mushroom. And that makes me think of another book. You mentioned your children, your grandchildren. I don't know whether you can hear me. Oh, well, I could hear you, but I couldn't see you. But now I see you. So you mentioned your children, your grandchildren. How do they fit in your current life? In my current life, well, they fit in different ways. They fit in differently compared to when we were younger. We moved to the mountains, there was lots of snow, there wasn't any school. These were things that we hadn't thought of at the time. My son was raised by my mother. We were fortunate enough for that to happen. And then my daughter by my older sister. So in the city, in Strasbourg and Colmar. I'm extremely happy that both of them have become a documentary filmmaker. They've chosen an adventurous lifestyle. But to come back to the way I start a novel, because I haven't quite answered the question, what happens is actually quite strange. Very recently, towards the end of 2022, I said that I would let go of un ange à ma table, or un chien à ma table. I would let it continue its course without me. And I thought that would help me start something else, because it's very important to resume writing, to start writing again. Writing is a way of life. You breathe differently when you start writing, when you get down to work. But what's very strange, and for me it always happens this way, when I say, okay, let's put this aside, let's start something else, I enter a magic circle, and everything that happens to me does not quite happen the same way. Everything takes on meaning. The fox that I saw went by so fast that I hadn't quite seen that it was a character, but it came back. The pianist that went by, I realized that, no, I wasn't going to let him go that just like that. And I would kidnap him. That's how things start. Things start taking on meaning. Everything takes on meaning. A fictional sense, a fictional meaning.
Do we have a final question for Claudie Hunzinger? If not, I'm going to break this poetic mood, but it's not my fault. I've been told that a car is blocking traffic, a blue Toyota. That's my car. Are you joking? No, you told me you came by train. A blue Toyota with VD plates 3713. 38. You don't have to stand up and make yourself known, but if you could move your car immediately, that would be wonderful. Thank you, Claudie, for this wonderful conversation. And Claudie will be signing her book upstairs.